heal as a team, we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. And I know if I'm going to have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You got to look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're going to see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're going to see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're going to do the same for him. That's a team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Welcome to the show. It is Sunday, September 18th, 2011. I am live with my good friend Susan Lindauer today. She's going to be hanging out for 2 full hours. We're going to be discussing everything from 9/11 to the Patriot Act to Iraq to anything Susan wants to cover, including Libya. Because the last time I talked to her, it was actually the afternoon that they started invading Tripoli, the rebels and NATO forces. And I haven't actually been able to have her on since then, so I'd like to get her take on a few things about that as well. So, without wasting any more time, because there's so much to talk about, Susan, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be on, Popeye. I love your show.
Thank you for coming back. You're always super informative, and my listeners love when you come on because, you're one of the only voices of truth about some of this stuff. I mean, I myself knew somewhat about the Lockerbie bombing, but in talking to you, you helped me piece the true facts about what really happened together. And it's disgusting to see it used as an excuse to, for us to be involved in Libya.
Well, it's really extraordinary. I'd like to talk a lot about Libya today. Libya, when I was on, what's happening in Libya right now is not what the corporate media is telling you. I was perhaps a little bit optimistic on the last show because I had been receiving all kinds of reports from inside Libya about the strength of Gaddafi's support base. However, NATO now has flipped it is now playing the role of propaganda, pretending that its level of support is very high. In fact, what's happening right now in Libya is that in Benghazi, the Islamic radicals are fighting against the old Gaddafi guard. It will surprise some of you, and I know you have a very sophisticated audience, to know that the new Transitional National Council is actually based with three major groups: Islamic radicals, which we've all talked about, and old
Susan might have gotten cut off. That happens sometimes during our interviews. It's kind of creepy and a little unnerving, but that actually happens a lot every time she's on. As the listeners know, sometimes she gets cut off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect, and I'm going to call her back. So just bear with me for a second. It happens sometimes. Usually when she gets to meaty stuff or a juicy tidbit is usually when it happens.
Hey there, we're off to a good start, aren't we?
I just said to the listeners, you know, it must be some good information, because every time you start to talk about something good, they cut your phone line off. This isn't something that doesn't happen all the time, so we're used to this. So
okay.
Go on, Susan.
Okay, yeah, people. I was about to say that there are three major groups tied to the Libyan rebels, and I still think of them as rebels because they have not won the country. They are Islamic radicals, they are royalists who would like to restore the monarchy to Libya, and they are from King Idris, who was deposed, you know, in the 40s, I guess. And there's also the old Gaddafi guard who came over to the Transitional Council so that they could protect their positions and their status and their jobs as in the bureaucracy. And so what's happening right now in Benghazi, while NATO and the corporate media, you know, CNN and all these places are telling you that, oh, NATO's doing really well, the Libyan people have accepted this change. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. In Benghazi right now, which is where the revolution was started, the Islamic radicals and the Gaddafi, old guard Gaddafi bureaucrats are now fighting it out. And the United States, ironically enough, and the CIA are coming down on the side of the Gaddafi bureaucrats, because the Islamic radicals want to instate Sharia. And they are like, they are now throwing off their cloaks. They're like the Trojan horse who came into this rebellion undercover, and they're Al-Qaeda and Islamic radicals, and they've brought in mercenaries from Afghanistan. And
it's important people understand that Sharia law is not it's not instituted right now in Libya. They had under Gaddafi. He was a benevolent dictator. Okay, I'm not saying the guy was awesome, but they had under Gaddafi more freedom than they are going to have now under this NATO-backed rebel council. And these, you know, this just goes to show that there's not one unified movement with these people. You have the people in the suits that call themselves the transitional party leaders, and then you have the psycho Al-Qaeda, you know, warriors that are out on the field themselves. And these are the guys that are doing the beheadings, well, them and the special forces from Qatar, right, and the Brits and us and the Dutch and a few other people.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And we have sided with a bunch of murderous thugs, and we keep saying this to people, and I think it's sinking in with your audience, but we just spread the word. These are the same identical fighters that the United States has been battling in Iraq and and the Soviets battled in Chechnya and the Balkans. This is the same group of people, identical fighters. These are not a group of similar people. They are the same people, and who we have been fighting in Afghanistan. These are the Taliban. Okay, the Taliban has now moved over to Libya. Why would we have wanted to do this? This was a very stupid, short-sighted move. We've taken a peaceful, prosperous, stable country. Again, Gaddafi was a dictator. He was a benevolent dictator. He had the best track record on women's rights in the whole Middle East. He had an 89% literacy rate. He had a 5% poverty rate. Every married couple got $50,000 just to start a family. Can you imagine if our government could do that? When a man and woman got married, they got $50,000 to get started and have children and start, building a house and having a life. Free education, free health care. Gaddafi did a lot of things right.
You're about to get cut off by the break, Susan. Stay right there.
That's okay.
As always, the bumpers always come in just when you're getting to, something good or something meaty, but that's okay. We'll pick it up right there when we come back. Listeners, stay tuned. 2 full hours with Susan Lindauer. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Susan, during the break, we were discussing all the infighting that's going on amongst the Libyan rebels. I mean, there's not even unity. It's, they played off with Sarkozy and Cameron flying in there the other day. And they have people in the hospital run out and, give them a hero's welcome, and the media plays it all up. Oh, look, they get a hero's welcome for, Libya and all this other crap. And, now the Obama administration's jumping on the bandwagon. Yay, we did a great job. Yay. Unified Libya. This is the people's revolution. They did it. Yay. There's not even any cohesive unity amongst these people. You have, fighters and warlords and, nomads and mercenaries. It's just crazy.
It is absolutely dishonest of them to pretend. In fact, when Sarkozy and Cameron showed up, most of the city was quiet. And it's an ominous silence, because these are cities that are very vibrant. They're usually people who are out on the street doing their business. And what they did was they went in and shut their doors. And they did not look out their windows. And they're showing, they did not look out their windows. They did not rush into the streets to greet them. In fact, when Sarkozy and Cameron arrived, they arrived to people who turned their back on them and said, we will not come even, take a peek at you, and we will not allow you to see our faces. You will drive through our cities and there will be no cars. There will be no well-wishers. You will come to a ghost town. And that is because the people of Libya absolutely revile NATO. These are people who have been, when I was at the United Nations covering Libya was one of the most paranoid and closed societies in the world. It would be like arriving in North Korea. They're very sophisticated people. They are not stupid. And part of the problem for the United States and NATO is that we have pretended for the media that they are not very bright people. They're Bedouin people. They are not sophisticated like we are. They're not urbane like we are. And in fact, that's not true. They are desert people, and they are somewhat nomadic. However, they also tend to speak 5 or 6 languages. They have a deep history that goes all the way back to the Phoenicians and Greco-Roman times. They see a history, they see their own history, they measure it in thousands of years, and they're very knowledgeable about their history, and they understand their place in the global scheme and where it fits in the Mediterranean and the power base that they occupy. And they refuse to bend to outsiders. So it would be like when I compare this all the time to Napoleon's arrival in Moscow. When Napoleon arrived, for those of you who have forgotten this story, when Napoleon arrived in Moscow, he had beaten the Russians back. He'd beaten the Russian generals back. And he showed up in Moscow and he's like, I am the triumphant victor. I am here. Where are the crowds to greet me? Where are the crowds to stand in awe of my presence and to come witness their humiliation? And one of the very significant things was that the mayor and the chief families of Moscow refused to go before Napoleon and give him the keys to the city. They just simply evaporated. They left him. So here he was, occupying a grand palace in Moscow. Napoleon was occupying a grand palace in Moscow, and there were no servants, and there were no throngs of nobility afraid, bowing and bending before him. And he said, where are all the people? And he looked out on Moscow, and he started to see fires. This is true. This is historically what happened. This is not make-believe. He started to see fires on the horizon around the city. And what was happening was that the great families, the Russian people, and a lot of the great families by this time had fled. To be honest, they'd left Moscow. But they burned it. They burned, the people went in and burned the great houses so that Napoleon couldn't have them. And that is what is starting to happen now in Libya. And it's very important to understand this, because the people of Libya, NATO thinks in its fantasy, it's been 3 whole weeks, people. It's been, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks since NATO forced its way in there. And they are hoping that the people's silence means obedience. But in fact, Libya does not have that kind of personality that would ever bend to anybody. And what they're doing is, in this time, there have been the rebels have started fighting amongst each other. There's a lot of infighting. The radicals are now fighting with the Gaddafi people. Ironically, the NATO favors the Gaddafi bureaucrats. But the rebels did not come into power to let now think and be reasonable. Think this through, whether you like them or not. The rebels did not come into power to allow Gaddafi's forces to stand. NATO wants Gaddafi's forces. The rebels, who are the real radicals, are determined to get rid of them. So they're fighting amongst each other in bloody battles. This is not like bureaucratic haggling. This is bloody battles, street fighting, gruesome, winner takes all kind of stuff.
And this kind of stuff's been going on, by the way, since the beginning, too, because all those airstrikes, when they would say, oh, NATO accidentally hit the rebels' position, that was happening. They didn't tell you because they didn't want you to know this, but that was happening because the rebels were calling in airstrikes on each other, because it would be like different factions, and the Hatfields and the McCoys working together, and whenever they got mad at each other, they would drop 2,000-pound bombs on one another. That's right. That is absolutely right. Yes. And the key, was it Yunus, the military leader of the rebels who was killed by Al-Qaeda forces because he was an old Gaddafi guard. And the military and the radicals went in and killed him and assassinated their own people so that they could take out the people who were then supported by NATO. And so what you're seeing is that NATO has lost control of the situation in a very big way. NATO, this is not mission accomplished. This is not a successful victory for NATO. NATO may have gotten into Libya for the moment, and they may be awarded all sorts of contracts. Turkey apparently is being awarded billions and billions of contracts. But again, you have the problem that no one has legitimacy with the people. These NATO rebels are considered rats and thugs and terrorists, and the people are not embracing the NATO position. On the day when Tripoli fell, it was so ominously silent that CNN and Al Jazeera were forced to broadcast celebration tapes from India. Do you remember that? Do you remember I have one of the copies that went viral on the internet. It's got like over 20,000 hits, and it was a soccer match or something that was in India, and it was all the fans out in the parking lot, and they had the balls to see these two BBC presenters are like, oh look, it's Green Square, Martyr Square in Tripoli, blah 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 blah. And it wasn't. It was completely in India. We're getting cut off by the bumper music. Guys, stay tuned. Got 3-minute break coming up, and we'll be right back with Susan Lindauer.
Try to convince myself these several years were not even real. Try to convince myself the media was making this up. That if I wait here, Morpheus will be waking me up. But instead I'm in my bed, game over. I ain't even drank nothing, but I got a hangover. First I was drunk from the lies they were feeding me. Then I sobered up and realized they were mistreating me. I shuffled out my bed and tried my best to gain some sense of it. The reasons for the cover-up.
We are hanging today with my good friend Susan Lindauer. Susan, whenever you and I get a chance to talk about Pan Am Flight 103, I always take at least 5 or 10 minutes to talk on the subject because so many listeners, we get new listeners every day. So, sometimes it's good to go back and touch on stuff that we've talked about in the past just in case, they've never heard it before. But Pan Am Flight 103, the flight that was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland, is constantly blamed on terrorists backed by Gaddafi, which is not true. And, so many people don't realize that it was a rogue element within the Central Intelligence Agency that pulled this off. And then, of course, they use it, just because one thing happens and one person does it doesn't mean that some other agency or other group won't use it to their advantage as well, I mean,
Exactly.
There are times the CIA does stuff, they bomb things, and you always get some tin pot dictator or moron from some, separatist organization that wants to take credit for it. So this kind of stuff does happen. So why don't you give the listeners a quick recap about Lockerbie and Pan Am Flight 103 and what happened?
Yeah, this is the original false flag. Before there was 9/11, there was Lockerbie. It is an extraordinary story. It started back in the 1980s when the CIA, when Islamic Jihad began taking hostages in Beirut during the Civil War. They had 96 high-profile Western hostages, including Terry Anderson, who was the Associated Press reporter, Jerry Levin, who was the CIA bureau chief. They had the head of the International School of Beirut. They had Terry Waite, who was the Anglican emissary from Britain. And they had a whole bunch of other people. Terry Anderson was held for 7 years. Okay, that's the Associated Press reporter. And the CIA felt that and the other person who was taken hostage, very importantly, was the CIA bureau chief, the station chief in Beirut. And he was kidnapped and brutally tortured, and they dumped his body in front of the building of the CIA headquarters at the front door. So they were saying, "Ha ha, we broke through your system. We broke through your classified system. We know your network. We beat this guy and he told us everything," is what they were saying. So they knew that they were dealing with some real bad people. And the CIA, when they saw this, decided they were going to do something that was quite extraordinary. And it may have started off innocently, but it became corrupt very quickly. They decided that in order to infiltrate Islamic Jihad, they would get in bed with them on heroin trafficking. And again, it may have started off innocently, but anytime you have profits like this, it ratchets up quickly. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you throw in hundreds of millions of dollars in profit that's being diverted into private bank accounts, you have a real problem for turning agents. A lot of people made their fortunes and are now in Washington at the very top of the CIA power structure, and they got their money off the heroin trade during this time period. Okay, so the Defense Intelligence Agency, what was happening is that as the intelligence community, as the dragnet would close in on these hostages, somebody was tipping off the terrorists, and the terrorists were then moving the hostages to new locations. And so it became obvious that there was a double agent who was profiting from the heroin trafficking, who was then feeding, who then was feeding the terrorists with double intelligence, so that they could escape capture, and they could keep the ring going, and therefore keep the profits coming from the heroin trade. And the profits were going from the Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. The shipments were traveling through Frankfurt, Germany, and then on to New York on the Pan Am Airlines. That was the airlines they were using. And the CIA was making sure that bags posted by shipped by the terrorists, Islamic Jihad, were not being searched at customs. So they were diverting attention away from customs. Okay, so the Defense Intelligence Agency said, we smell a rat here. Somebody is tipping off the terrorists. And they filed a complaint in Washington, and the CIA and the FBI sent a team out to investigate the heroin trafficking out of the Bekaa Valley, and to investigate how the CIA was compromising its objectives to capture the Islamic radicals who were holding the hostages, and how these hostages were just mysteriously slipping out of the net. Every time they were about to get pounced on, they'd be moved. And some of these people had been held for years. Jerry Levin was held for 3 years. Terry Anderson was held for 7 years. And they were held in excruciating conditions. They were literally chained to a floor with a bucket to pee in. They didn't get like an hour out every day. They were locked up in a basement with no sunlight, and in handcuffs and shackles and a blindfold for 7 years. This is torture. This is cruelty. This is really, they were subjected to mock executions. It was horrible situation. Anyway, so the CIA sends the team out to do the investigation, and the double agent at the CIA slips a message to Islamic Jihad that everyone's going to be traveling back to Washington. The investigative team is going to be traveling back to Washington on Pan Am 103, and they gave them the flight number, the day, the time, etc., and Islamic Jihad then slips a bomb onto the airplane and blows it up. The bomb is put on there by Abu Elias. We know exactly who did it. Abu Elias is now living in under an alias in Northern Virginia. He lives about 6 miles from my house. And that's how they always put it. The CIA always says, he lives 6 miles from the White House, darn it, get him. But he is protected at the highest levels by the U.S. government. And it's offensive to anybody who cares about national security and anti-terrorism, or the heroin trade, or just the fact that, that we have, private citizens who are paying a terrible price for what our government is doing, and the corruption level. So that's a long story about Lockerbie, but unfortunately that's what it takes to tell it.
Well, it's important to get the truth out, because you got Gaddafi being blamed for it, and he didn't do it. It was
right.
This backdoor black ops drug running crap, and that's the same story over and over again that you always find. It's always, look, Mena, Arkansas, Bill Clinton, same thing. They found those 2 kids dead on the train tracks. Their parents don't believe that those kids were killed, been hit by the train. They believe they were killed and in place by, their bodies were placed on there because they witnessed a drug drop off,
Yes. Exactly.
And that was the CIA working with the state police and everything else. That was them bringing in, to the local level and dispersing it. And that then Governor Bill Clinton was covering everything up, and he has his fingers all involved in that whole thing. And that's just a small version of the same thing. And there you go. It's the same thing. This black ops drug running crap. And that's where all this money comes from for them to pull off these little events like 9/11 and all that. I mean, they do steal money too through the Pentagon, but the stuff that they don't have to account for is all this drug money, which is like 3 times what they get from the taxpayers. If you think what they fleece us for is a lot, you know, that's nothing. That's what they use the stuff that, you know, they line their pockets with our tax dollars and stuff. And yeah, they might buy some stuff and actually maybe help the facility run, you know, on an open level. But when it comes to all the black ops stuff they do, all that stuff, that's why they have to run drugs, because Congress, you know, shut down the black ops budget for the CIA. So the CIA went, yeah, no problem, we'll just run drugs, and you know, and then we don't have to report to Congress. Hey, this is even better. Thanks, Congress. So now there's no oversight. Yeah. Not that we should be smuggling drugs at all anyway, but there's no oversight. So these guys are just bringing money hand over fist. And you know what happens.
That's right.
Somebody gets greedy. Right. Somebody's got a chance, and they say, "Oh well, I know these guys on the same team. We work for the CIA, but these guys are going to shut my business down, and I'm going to lose, you know, millions, if not billions of dollars." No, I don't think so. This guy's got to go, and so does this whole team. And then they just blame it on Gaddafi or whoever, you know, whatever the bad guy of the day is. It could be Saddam, anybody else. We're going to break, guys. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill.
We are back. This is the last segment of the first hour. Don't worry, we have another full hour with Susan. So, don't worry, we will cover everything you could possibly dream of that hasn't been covered by the mainstream media, I promise. Susan, did you see the protesters down at Wall Street? A couple hundred, well, I don't say 100,000. There was, started off with a couple hundred, and it turned into a couple thousand. That's what I was trying to say.
It's awesome. It is awesome. People are not afraid. They're going out there and they're challenging the direction of our country and the new world order and such. So.
Well, some of them are kind of stupid. I mean, some of them are, we should get rid of capitalism. It's not capitalism that caused this problem. It's this mutant form of capitalism that we've allowed to take over. Okay, which if you go read. The best thing I could tell anybody that doesn't understand what I'm talking about is to go read, what's his name? John Perkins, the economic hitman. Go read his books, especially go read his newest one, Hoodwinked. And, you know, he explains how the way that economics is being taught to this generation and the, you know, the past couple generations is not how it really is, and that these professors from back in the 50s and the 60s were calling this out, saying, hey, this is not a good idea, and blah, 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 blah. But people were ignoring them, and then, of course, the mainstream media pushed what's now being taught as opposed to what used to be taught. So they, you know, you change up the curriculum, you change up what people are taught, boom, you know, 20, 30 years down the road, people don't even realize that there was ever a change to begin with.
Exactly. That's really good. That's very good. And it's the monetarist policy has really been was debunked when I was in college. I mean, it was just there's not a trickle down doesn't work. It never did.
Because it never trickles down.
Yeah, it doesn't trickle down. It freezes at the top. Because those people won't let it out of their fist.
Yeah,
they won't allow the money.
So they don't allow it to trickle down.
Exactly.
You know? They want everything for themselves. They're greedy. They're into eugenics. They think I mean, these people, why do you think they push the whole vaccine agenda and everything? Which I guarantee you, the poor people of Libya, you'll see, I'm willing to bet you'll see Bill Gates and them in there in the next 6 months pushing vaccines on all of them, because they're already in Africa. So now they can just cruise on up into Libya. And they're talking about putting military bases back in there, Susan. Remember back in the day we used to have B-52 bases in Libya. This is going back, 40 years ago.
Well, here's what we have to understand about Libya, is that We are in the situation now of creating a new Iraq, another Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq Part 2, The Revenge.
Yeah, the revenge. And, you know, the people of Libya don't want the United States in their country. They don't want NATO in their country. And nobody invited NATO to come in. The Islamic radicals played us against each other. They are a Trojan horse. They came in wearing, you know, their wolves in sheep's clothing. They came in pretending to be passive and submissive to U.S. goals, but any wise man would know that the jihadis are serious about their values, and they have no intention of dismissing Sharia.
Their leader, we held in Guantanamo. We held him as an enemy combatant in Guantanamo, and then we're like, let's put him in charge over here because he's a good guy now. He's reformed. Yeah. He says that he likes the United States. So I could say that, too, if I were him. You know, if I was a bad guy, I could say the same thing. I love the United States. Doesn't mean I really mean it. You know what I mean? That's
right. And Hillary Clinton, I mean, saying that, oh, don't worry, it's going to be okay. They support inclusive government. They believe in democracy. They believe in women's rights. No, they don't. And anyone, you know, whether you like Islam or you don't like Islam, you have to be honest. When when these people are radicalized, they do not want to see anything except Sharia law. They do not want to see women's rights. They have a very strict interpretation of Islam, which negates all of those things. And they have been very honest. We should look at them as being very honest. They've told us right up until this point exactly what they stand for. And we should look at the example that they set in Iraq and Afghanistan. Whenever anyone tries to set up a base inside their countries, Islamic countries, those people are subject to attack. And what's going to happen is the NATO rebels are going to have to decide very quickly, do they support Britain or do they support the people of Libya? And I think that they will quickly decide that if they want to have friends in Libya among the people who speak their language and share their religion, they're going to have to throw off NATO. And then you're going to start seeing that the same people who today are shaking Sarkozy's hands are now going to be the next suicide bombers. And and I'm willing to bet they'll hit Europe first because it's easier to hit Europe than to come all the way across the pond over here and nail us. And I'm willing to bet you'll see something happen within the next 6 months to a year. And if it's not a false flag event, it won't be 6 months. I don't think it'll be. Oh, you mean like in Europe?
Yeah. No,
I think the rebellion in Libya is going to start now.
Yeah, the civil war is probably going to break out.
There's going to be suicide bombings inside Tripoli and Libya almost immediately. I give it another 4 to 6 weeks.
And there aren't any, like, if they tell you, oh, well, you know, it's Gaddafi loyalists, I doubt it'll be Gaddafi loyalists. I doubt if anybody doing suicide bombings, because that stuff didn't get picked up. Even Iraq didn't have suicide bombings until we introduced Al-Qaeda to Iraq. You know, we created the boogeyman,
but we've
and then
already
to Iraq, we injected it into Iraq. So,
but we've already got the Al-Qaeda there. We brought Al-Qaeda to Libya. And ironically, the Libyan people think they're terrorists. The Libyan people don't like Al-Qaeda, but they don't like NATO either. And so there was supposed to be a false flag operation today, of all things. There was flyers put out earlier in the week calling on the residents of Tripoli to go out on September 18th, which was today, and to go into the squares with guns and to have a takeover of NATO. And tomorrow there's going to be a meeting at the United Nations to determine whether the UN should be sending ground troops into Libya. So it's very interesting because when these flyers started to appear all over Tripoli, and Gaddafi's forces immediately responded inside the country and they went out on the radio. Musa Ibrahim went out on the radio and gave talks to the people, and Gaddafi gave talks saying, we do not want the people to confront NATO at this time because we know the timing is set that that the next day, if you have the riot on the September 18th, there's already a movement on September 19th to try to bring ground forces into Libya. And and Gaddafi's people came out and said, we do not want you to rebel at this time because we don't want to give them an excuse to vote on September 19th to send in ground forces. So Tripoli was quiet today, but the fighting is going on right now in Ben Walid and some of the central Ceuta and some of the central Libyan towns. Gaddafi's forces actually control villages and towns for about 200 miles. This is not a done deal. Gaddafi controls a major part of central and eastern and Ceuta, from Ceuta to Ben Walid and all those villages in between. The rebels, what happened, what I tried to say in my previous interview was that the rebels were capturing a city or a town, and then they were moving to the next town and leaving it vacant. And so the press, the CNN and Al Jazeera were saying, oh, the rebels got this town, oh, the rebels got in another town, but there's no control because the rebels are such a small group that in order for them to catch the next town, they had to leave the town that they had just got and move to the next town en masse. So they were, and as soon as they left the town, the people were throwing back up the green flag. And now they're in Tripoli, but and apparently they got in on a another false flag. And again, this is a danger sign, though. What happened was the mosques in Tripoli broadcast a siren at a few key radical Islamic mosques. They on the Friday. At Friday prayers, instead of having the chanting, they put out a siren, and that was the call for the rebellion, for sleeper cells in Tripoli to revolt. And again, this comes from Islamic radicals who are very conservative and devoted to the Sharia. It does not mean they are loyal to Britain. It does not mean they are loyal to France. It means they are loyal to Sharia. Don't get confused and think you're somewhere else. We have not won this war.
Very well put, Susan. Very well put. You're going to get caught off by the break. We'll be right back in a few minutes, guys. Stay tuned for hour number 2. Welcome back for hour 2 of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. Make sure you check my site out because it's really a plethora, however you want to say the word, of information. Before we were cut off by the top of the hour break, Susan was giving you the lowdown on what's been going on in Libya and what you can look forward to in Iraq Part 2, The Revenge, Libya. Because, and I mean, I say it with sarcastic, a little bit of sarcastic humor, but seriously, it's horrible because doesn't anybody realize that we're doing the same thing over again? And we foment, I hate saying we, let me rephrase that. The intelligence services fomented that civil war in Iraq, okay? And they're going to do it in Libya. And they're not even going to really have to. They already provided the kindling by putting all this hodgepodge group of, psychos and mercenaries together, and now they're just going to battle it out. And you're going to have these. I'm waiting to see if they're going to start to assassinate the NTC leaders. All these Transition Council guys. I wonder if they're going to start if the Al Qaeda guys are going to start taking them out now.
They already are. There's huge fighting going on inside Benghazi. I mean, like warfare, street warfare. The Gaddafi forces are fighting in the central part of the country, and they have control of the central part of the country. The rebels have asked that NATO will continue bombing the cities, and the problem for the rebels are that the people hate NATO. They hate the British. They hate the French. And so NATO, and they hate Obama. And so the United States has lost friends and lost alliances in this country, where they were 6 months ago, these people were minding their own business. 6 months ago, they were willing and quite happy, and their lives were good, and they were happy to be friends with France and Italy and the United States and Britain. There was no problems. And we have manufactured this war out of no justification at all. I mean, at least President Bush, whom I frankly despise, as you can imagine, he at least had a phony excuse, which is weapons of mass destruction, and he lied about it. It was a huge, big, whopping lie, but at least he pretended that there was an excuse. This doesn't even pretend to have an excuse. These people were peaceful, prosperous. They were doing business with the United States as an ally. All was good in the world, and now all of a sudden NATO's destroying them. And now tomorrow, the United Nations is debating whether there should be a peacekeeping force sent into Libya. And the NATO forces passed out flyers urging the people to come into the streets and fight NATO today. And Gaddafi's loyalist leaders came out and had radio announcements and TV announcements, because they still have media. And they told the Libyan people, they said, do not go into the streets. This is a game by NATO. This is a false flag operation, is what they're calling it, by NATO. It's a psyop to try to lure you to come in confrontation so that they can use this as an excuse for tomorrow's vote at the United Nations. So Gaddafi told them not to do it. And then they obeyed Gaddafi. The people are still supporting Gaddafi. And I'll tell you something, even if you kill Gaddafi, let's just say that they do manage to kill him off. NATO is hoping that it would be like the death of Saddam Hussein, and it would be like when Saddam Hussein dies, the rebellion will die. Well, that's not what happened in Iraq. Once the people knew that Saddam was really not going to be coming back at all, that's when the rebellion skyrocketed. Because they're like, okay, if we throw out the United States and Britain, we're not going to have Saddam at all. So let's join forces. And so anybody who is opposing Gaddafi would be happier if he dies, because then they can join the forces fighting NATO without worrying that it'll bring him back into power. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, because if there was a chance that Saddam would come back into power, obviously they don't want Saddam, but they don't want the United States or NATO or anybody else involved either. They don't want these countries, this coalition of the billing. I don't call it the coalition of the willing. I call it the coalition of the billing, because most of it was private contractors, mercenaries.
Yes.
And that's what they're replacing. All the soldiers they're pulling out of there, they're just replacing them with private contractors. There's something like 250,000 mercs running around Iraq right now, and they're all on our payroll. Well, that's the equivalent of the amount of troops we had over there. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh.
And it's just
Poor
growing.
Baghdad.
There's just more.
Poor Baghdad.
Do you think those people in Iraq feel safer knowing that they have Blackwater patrolling their streets now? I doubt it.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. And do they hate us any less?
Yeah, because they don't.
Baghdad is a collapsed society. It's a failed country.
That's what people don't get, Susan. They don't look at us and go, "Whoa, it's just private contractors. It's not the United States military." They don't look at it like that. They look at it like, you're American, you have guns, you're American military. So they're not. Yeah. The Iraqi people aren't like, "Oh, it's Blackwater. It's not the army or the Marines." No, it's one huge invading force, and they're part of it.
Yes, exactly. It is. This is just. It's so bad. It's so bad. And now we're doing the same thing in Libya, and we should expect this to become Obama's Iraq.
and those people had it better than the Iraqis did under Saddam Hussein. So
yes.
we took away. They had free education, free college, all that stuff was free. No loan, no borrowing money from the government, no usury, none of that crap.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't exist. Notice what was the first thing the first two things that the quote unquote rebels built when they or put together, I should say, not built, but the first two things they organized when they got NATO backing and they started to get some official recognition or whatever. The first two things that they did when they got Benghazi and everything else under control, well, supposedly under control, they created a central bank and their own oil company. But I'm supposed to. Yes. This is about protecting the civilians. They didn't even have him beat. They didn't even have him pushed back at all. And they're creating a central bank and an oil company. But nobody thinks that's shady at all. Nobody bothers to, maybe look into that a little bit. And the people, they do. I'm being sarcastic. The people that do just get ignored. Look at Tarpley and the rest of them that were in part of that, Cynthia McKinney and all them, and Wayne Madsen and all them. And what's his name? The one that got shot while he was riding the bike. The old man. All that other guy that. He's not a congressman because they're not really they can't vote in D.C. but they're wannabe like representative or whatever. He was in hiding for like a month because he said that he witnessed the rebels ethnically cleansing black people. He watched out a window as they killed people. But
they've been lynching people. They've been lynching black people,
crazy.
And they're literally dragging people. And the thing is, the rebels are vicious individuals. They're deeply racist. They are lynching black people. In one scene, they hung a man upside down and cut his head off upside down. We have that on Obama's Libya, don't we?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them up on Obama's Libya, the beheadings, all that. And the one beheading you see, the guy is you can see them rounding up all the black Africans too in the other videos because all the people that they have locked up and under lock and key or whatever you want to call it, handcuffed, tied or whatever, everybody that's prisoners, they're all black Africans. And of course they say when I say the mainstream media or Al Jazeera or them, they're always they're Gaddafi supporters, but they're not. And they're being forced to admit that they are rounding up black Africans and killing them. But it's because it's been going on for 3.5 or 4 months at least, so they have no choice.
Yeah, they have to admit it. Yes.
He's got some good video footage of it where they were panning around Tripoli and you see all these black Africans with their hands tied behind their back, shot in the head. That was the rebels.
Yeah.
They said, it was retreating Gaddafi forces. They wouldn't kill their own people.
Yeah, that's right.
These guys are doing genocide. It's crazy. We'll be right back. We are back, and I'm going to address something really quick, and this is important. Every once in a while, you'll have a troll or some disinfo putz that calls himself a skeptic or whatever, and they want to try to debunk Susan, and they always say, well, the Bush administration, they locked her up, and she was talking, she was talking to Iraq, and they tried to find her mentally incompetent. But what they don't tell you is that 5 days before Obama took office, that all that went away because the Bush administration dropped everything. Now, if she really was an enemy agent, if she really was crazy or anything, they wouldn't have dropped it. Obama's team could have just, picked up where they left off, or Bush would have pushed, and in 8 years, surely could have taken care of business. But he didn't, okay? And one of the biggest thorns in his side is the fact that they never found any weapons of mass destruction, just like Susan said they weren't going to. Okay, so nothing she said ever has been disproved. In fact, time has proven her to be right. Okay?
Exactly.
Time has proven her to be accurate. So, if she really was a bad guy and she really was distrustful and everything, why did they, in the course of 8 years, never, ever, ever succeed in getting her thrown away? And then why did they drop the charges 5 days before Obama took office? I guess she's not that bad, huh?
Yeah, well, let me just say something about that, because for 5 years I tried to get a trial. And if you really, the key thing here is, if you really had evidence, if the Justice Department really had evidence against me, my attorney was demanding our day in court. I wanted to go to trial, and if the Justice Department really could prove anything against me, they had 5 years in which to do so. And it wasn't me who was fighting the trial. It was them who was fighting the trial. And I actually had, after they declared me incompetent, on the basis, now get this, I was declared incompetent on the basis that I believed I had a, quote, 95% chance of acquittal, and therefore I could not appreciate the gravity of the charges against me. And so long as I did not take the case seriously enough, I should not be allowed to have a trial at all. Now, these are treason charges. Why would I not take that seriously? This is just ridiculous. It would have if I was convicted, I'd have a 10-year prison sentence. And yet the government could not put its evidence in front of a jury, because the evidence was very different than the real evidence was very different than what they told you. They, in the press reports, they said, $10,000. She accepted $10,000 from the Iraqis. No, I did not. That is a lie. That is an outright lie. And they had no evidence that I did. What they had were 3 receipts for lunches in New York City, which is the most expensive city in the world, and each receipt was for about $32 or $33. The total for the lunches came to $92.92 for 3 lunches with a diplomat. And we were able to prove that I was not even in New York City on those days, because the dates were, thankfully, these were visa receipts that were date and time stamped. So I was even able to prove that I was in Maryland at the time, working on my computer, talking long distance on the telephone. Something, I had alibis. And I could prove that it would be impossible for me to have gotten to New York City.
And that's why they wouldn't want to bring it to court, because their whole case would be ripped apart. Hence, your 95% assuredness that you were going to win your case. So, what does that tell you?
And and Judge Mukasey, who was the first judge in my case, said, it's very unlikely that Susan Lindauer's actions rise to the level of criminal activity anyway. And Judge Mukasey, essentially what they did was they ran what's called a PSYOP, just so we get this out in the open. They ran a PSYOP, and they said that I was they said 2 things. One, that I believed in my innocence very deeply, which is true. The evidence against me was puny as hell. The second thing they tried to say was that I was a religious maniac. Well, let me see. I do believe in God, but I don't go to church. Sorry, guys, I don't. I don't read the Bible every day. And my Aunt Susie had a very good quote when I first was released. One of my relatives called me and said, that they knew that it was a lie, because I couldn't quote the Bible if you put a gun to my head, and threatened me with 10 years in prison. And my relative said to me, we knew it was a lie because of that, and we just figured you made somebody really, really mad, and that we could understand.
And you did.
But this religious stuff is just not going to work. If you know me at all, you'd never think that I was a religious person. I'm just not. But I do believe in God. I do believe in God, and I'm really angry that anybody would attack me for believing in God in such a moderate way.
But do you see how they do that? They put it out there in mainstream, the mainstream that, if you believe in God, you're a Jesus freak now. That, you're always picked on. And I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not a Bible thumper. I don't go to church every day. But still, that's demonized now. And then as soon as Susan, if they ask you, do you believe in God? Oh, she's a Bible thumper because she believes that there's some sort of higher energy. She didn't say what she believes in. She didn't say which God. You said a God. You didn't say what you believe in.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow.
I would say that Bush was more of a
I mean, they
religious
sound like Bill Maher. I mean, Bill Maher, who hates religion. I love Bill Maher's shows. Bill Maher is so infuriating, and he's brilliant and sarcastic and satirical, and you just can't stop watching him because he's so much fun. Okay, I think he's great. And some things I agree with and some things I don't, but he's a lot of fun. But on religion, he is absolutely paranoid about religion. And he demonizes religion, but so does the Bush administration. So did the Justice Department. And so for all of you out there, the Justice Department was just as bad as Bill Maher. Except they tried to put me in prison for it.
Yeah, they did put me in prison. Talk about religious fanaticism. Look at Bush.
Yes. Oh my goodness. See, I'm not evangelical.
Who's the fanatic and who's not the fanatic? You know what I'm saying, Susan?
Rick Perry, Michelle Bachmann. Wow, seriously, Sarah Palin.
Different level, and you understand that they're Satanists at the core, and that they've actually witnessed sacrifices and stuff. Then it even makes you sicker because it's like, wow, they don't even believe in the crap that that they're spewing to try to get this religious base to follow them. That's why it's even more sickening because they don't believe it. They pretend to be a religious crazy. Oh, I love. I'm conservative. I'm hardcore. I'm all about God. I go to church 7 days a week. But then they do all this other shady, evil crap.
Yes.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. Exactly. So I actually wear their attacks with pride because as far as I'm concerned, it's proof. It is proof that they have done great wrong to America. They lied about Iraq. They lied about 9/11, and ironically, the very things that people use to attack me are evidence of their own wrongdoing, of the government's wrongdoing. And so, I don't want people to forget. I actually, for the record, for all of you who love to quote Wikipedia against me and say, Wikipedia. At first, my attorneys and I tried to change Wikipedia. We tried to correct it.
And I bet you could. You're about to get cut off by the break. I'll let you pick up on that.
And then we decided that we would leave it there because it's the evidence that my story really happened. Because someday people are going to be like, no, they didn't really do this. They didn't really do this. And they did. And we're going to be there to make sure to bash their heads in with it.
You hear that? Susan's coming for you.
I'm coming for you. We'll never let you forget what you did.
To the impact, many taking a nap. In fact, they would fake an attack to make way for the
Susan, before we were cut off by the break, as always, you were just getting to the crux of some information, and then the break comes and cuts you off.
Well, we were talking about Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has bastardized me. And when it first started, I was very upset. But then I realized something. My attorneys and I actually tried to change Wikipedia and correct the information because there's so much bad, wrong information on Wikipedia. It's totally debunked. And, I mean, at one point they didn't even have my right birthday. I actually had to have my attorney give my birth certificate to Wikipedia so that they would put the correct date of my birth on the damn website. And then my attorney and I got to thinking about it. And we realized something very important. Wikipedia is actually hard documentation of the corruption of the Bush administration in my case. Because as people hear my story and they hear my voice and they read my articles, they are realizing that any garbage about me is just a psyop. It's a lie. It's an invention by the Republican leadership trying to discredit any real information about 9/11, the 9/11 investigation, Iraq, the war on terror. And I am very proud to pose such a threat to the war on terror because it's a fraud. And it's very important for people to understand that it's a fraud. And so my attorneys and I decided that we would leave Wikipedia as it is because it is a record of the vicious, savage attempts by the Bush administration and the Republican leadership to deceive the American people. And it shows to what extreme lengths they were willing to go in a psyop to discredit me. Do you see what I mean? And so in the future, we and it's already starting to happen, believe it or not, Popeye. People do pop in and say, oh, you were never arrested. Oh, really? I was never thrown in prison on a military base. I was never subjected to the Patriot Act. That's a fantasy. That's a lie. And so by leaving Wikipedia up, we have the evidence which just shows how bad they really are and how corrupt they really are.
Yeah, Wikipedia is about as reliable as a source of information as Snopes or any of these other loser sites. First of all, Wikipedia, anybody can sign into that and change the information on that. Okay? Yeah. Anyone. So how is that reliable? You know, some drunk moron could sign into it and put up whatever he wants. You know, in theory. In reality, they have people that go on and do that and change it. I mean, everybody that ever comes out about anything, if you look up it'll have the official story. If you look up a woman I interviewed named Judith Baker, okay? She's Lee Harvey Oswald's mistress. You look her up on Wikipedia, same stuff. There's all sorts of nasty stuff. Jim Fetzer, a researcher, same thing. I mean, Alex Jones, anybody. You look up anybody that's comes out and opens their mouth and talks about things that differ from the official line.
Yes.
And you look them up on Wikipedia, it's all ad hominem attacks, all lies, all crap. I don't use Wikipedia for anything. I wouldn't do anything with that website. I wouldn't even wipe my ass with it. It is useless. Okay, and so is Snopes, just in case anybody uses that for, well, I heard it on Snopes.com. Snopes is two people, a man and his wife. They're both hardcore liberals and Obama supporters, okay? They buy into the whole left-right paradigm lie. End of story. That's how you know they are tainted. Hardcore Obama bots. And don't get me wrong, if they were hardcore George Bush supporters, I think they're retards too. You know, people need to wake up. People just need to wake up. It's time to realize that. Look, if you don't realize by now that Obama is Bush Part 2, I mean, come on. Clinton was Bush Senior Part 2. They're best buddies. They hang out with each other all the time. People think Clinton and Bush Senior hate each other. Bush Senior calls Bill Clinton his other son. Okay, that's what he calls him.
Oh.
Yeah, he calls him his other son. I mean, that's how close they are. So you can just picture if he's close, if those two are close, Junior's, they're all connected. Come on. It's time to wake up and smell the coffee. There is no left-right anymore. There's no Republican, Democrat. That's a lie. It's a lie. Do you think the Democrats give any more of a crap about this country than the Republicans do? No. The whole Tea Party, they got hijacked. What's her name? Michelle Bachmann. She's a nutbag, okay? First of all, she's a piece of crap. She's former IRS. Okay, she's a special kind of piece of shit because she goes to somebody. She was the woman that went to someone's house, okay, and she was the one that went to someone's house and took their stuff, their physical belongings. That's a special kind of dirtbag, okay. That takes a real special kind of person to do that kind of stuff to somebody, to kick them out of their house and take their possessions. That and I'm sure these people don't even realize anything about the 16th Amendment or the Federal Reserve. They think what they're doing is, well, we're doing the right thing. It doesn't mean that they're innocent because I don't, they didn't let the Nazis off at Nuremberg with that kind of attitude. Well, we were just following orders. It doesn't really matter. You should have known better, And she's that kind of special evil. And then you got Rick Perry. He's the Bilderberg scumbag. I mean, he went to Bilderberg in 2007 and begged and begged and begged to run for, be put in for the presidential election in 2012. And here he is. He's running for president. And he's another one with the Gardasil vaccine, the HPV vaccine.
Oh, God. Yeah, what is it with these people and these vaccines all of a sudden? Jesus.
That's the answer to everything. And if anybody, let me rephrase that. That's their answer to everything. The real answer is not vaccination. Anybody that researches this knows that vaccination does not equal immunization at all. It doesn't equal it. It doesn't get anywhere near it. It's not how it works. Okay, vaccines are horrible, horrible, horrible things. They've caused nothing but problems. I suggest people go look up the polio vaccine and the SV40 virus. Okay, and then you won't wonder why there's soft tissue cancer problems. Why women have such high rates of breast cancer now and lymphoma and melanoma. You're told melanoma comes from the sun, but that's not where this whole thing of melanoma came from. Over 100 million vials. Okay, the first batch was 100 million. God. And they were all contaminated, and they had about another 100 million that were still contaminated sitting in, and they supposedly, I'm doing air quotes, Susan, they supposedly destroyed this. But I've heard and I've seen, I heard some stuff when I researched it, and I have seen some evidence to point out that they were still using these polio vaccines until the 90s. Okay? And they were tainted with the SV40 virus. It's because they grew the polio vaccine inside of the monkeys or inside the kidneys of monkeys, and they had the SV40 virus in their blood. God. So the vaccine got tainted with it, and then they didn't realize this till afterwards. And after they had realized it, they started research on a vaccine because they realized that there was going to be this mass cancer epidemic, and that got hijacked and turned into a bioweapons project that was aimed at taking out Castro. And they they weaponized cancer. They turned it into an injectable form, and within 28 days of being injected, the person is dead. Like, once you've died, it takes 28 days for it to run its cycle. It's ridiculous.
Oh my God!
I interviewed. Oswald's girlfriend was the one that I already knew some of the information about it, but she put some of the other pieces together and actually confirmed it. And then I researched her. And I researched her first, and then I interviewed her. But I researched all this, and it's so interconnected with the JFK assassination. It's disgusting. And if you think about it, look at all these truth tellers that come out. They die of cancer. You got Aaron Russo, Bill Hicks, Jack Ruby. He even said, "I've been injected with cancer cells." And exactly 28 days after Ruby was diagnosed with cancer, he died.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Isn't that remarkable?
So
wow.
And he kept talking. He kept saying that if you got to look him up on YouTube. I've uploaded them, and other people have uploaded them. There's interviews with him where he said that the people that put me in the position I'm in now aren't going to let me tell you the truth, or the truth come out about what's really going on in the form of government that has taken over since Kennedy was shot. And look where we are 50 years later. We're invading countries, we're bombing the hell out of things. And I'm not saying John F. Kennedy was a saint, but I don't think if him or his brother had gotten in office, we'd be where we are today. And that's why they had to blow his brains out. Because the Kennedy boys just wouldn't play ball. I think, they had an epiphany. And I've heard different rumors about why he had an epiphany, but it doesn't really matter. The fact is he had an epiphany, and that's all that matters. And they blew his head off in Dealey Plaza over it. We're going to break, guys. Stay tuned. We got one more segment with Susan Lindauer. We're back for the final segment of the Sunday edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Susan, the one thing I actually wanted to have you discuss, and I completely forgot because there's so much going on with Libya and everything else, were the missing security tapes at the World Trade Center. And you've talked about this before. Go ahead and tell the listeners, what the story is with that.
Yeah, this has to do with, but by now all of you know that I believe that the airplane hijackings were a cover for controlled demolition. So I am one of the people who believes that both things happened. It's not an either-or situation. And so people who have heard my story and who know about the advance warnings about 9/11 are now hopefully becoming aware that both things happened together. One of the things that makes me feel that there was a controlled demolition, besides the fact that there's excellent research, of course, by architects and engineers for 9/11, really great research by Richard Gage and those guys, is that there's a missing piece that I was told while my book was being published. It was too late, unfortunately, to add it to the book. It would have required an extra chapter, and my book was already done. What it turns out was, however, not a friend, a professional colleague at the State Department told me that he had gained information that in the parking garage of the World Trade Center, there were security tapes that have been concealed from the public. And the security tapes recorded strange events going on in the very early morning hours about 10 days before 9/11. And he told me this: on the days from about August 22nd, August 23rd, until about September 3rd, every night at about 3 o'clock in the morning, mysterious vans were arriving, van trucks were arriving at the World Trade Center. They were arriving at about 3 a.m. and they were leaving at about 5 a.m. And they were only there for about a 2-hour period, and there were approximately 3 of them who were coming in. It may have been 4 one night, it may have been 2 one night, but there were a couple of vans, approximately 3 every night. And he believes, and the people who have reviewed the tapes believed that was when they were bringing something into the World Trade Center. They may have been wiring it for months prior to this. It's very conceivable that this was the end phase, and that they had already done a lot of other work. I'm not going to try to dispute that. But something was brought in at the last minute that they needed to finish it off and to complete the project. And it was definitely within that 10-day period. This was an anomaly. It had never happened before. This was not a constant thing that every morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, this had been going on for years or even 6 months. It was only a 10-day window. And after the September 2nd, September 3rd, these trucks never appeared again. And they were quite, the vans were studied extensively enough that they determined it was not janitorial trucks. My friend who told me this, my professional colleague friend who told me this, said that they studied the locations of the janitors' homes, and they were able to determine that the vans did not go to any of their houses. Now that's significant because it says to me as an asset that they were able to trace these trucks after they left the World Trade Center as well. And they were able to follow them possibly through other cameras around the city to determine that they had not, like other traffic cameras, for example, other security cameras. They were able to know that none of these people were going to the houses of the janitors. So it's interesting because they did track these people, and they did track the vehicles, and this is a big, and the people who did see the tape did believe that it included that they were bringing something into the World Trade Center on those nights. And they did believe, they did reach the conclusion that others would conclude that they were wiring the buildings. And that's why this information was suppressed. So. And
if they were using unconventional explosives, obviously they would need
military-grade explosives. These are military-grade
explosives, not just regular dynamite. People have to understand there's a huge difference between an explosion and a detonation. A detonation is a shock wave that is a detonation creates a shock wave. okay? And the shock wave is what has the brisance, the shattering power. That's where the shattering of concrete and metal comes from. That doesn't happen in an explosion. An explosion doesn't release enough force. Explosions are usually lower, not low grade.
Ammonium nitrate.
Yes, like a lower grade. An explosion is usually created by lower grade explosives, as opposed to, you need like fast acting, like you need this super fast reaction, something that you can't even in the blink of an eye. C4 works because it goes from a solid to a vapor without going through the liquid phase. That's what the detonator does. Okay, it creates a chemical reaction, and that chemical reaction is so powerful. Okay, that because instead of going from a solid to a liquid to a vapor, it goes from a solid to a vapor in the blink of an eye. The amount of energy that is released is what creates the shock wave, hence the shattering power. But that's a high explosive. Regular explosives aren't going to do that. Low power.
You could not produce this in your basement or your garage.
No.
This had to be a military-grade style weapon.
Without a doubt.
And
Stephen Jones,
without a doubt. Impossible.
It's dust. So you have thermite. I don't believe thermite took the buildings down the shattering power. I believe they used some other stuff. Maybe it was they would have to have used a ton of C4. Personally, I think they might have used something like what this guy named Michael Riconosciuto talked about. You have to go see it's a movie about Oklahoma City Ted Gunderson did, Murder in the Heartland, back in the 90s, and he talks to Riconosciuto. Gunderson knew him. He worked on this barometric bomb for the CIA, and I'm sure a variant of it could have been used to do what they did to the towers, along with maybe C4, and I think they used thermite to cut the beams, because there had to be
thermite in there, because thermite melts steel, and it also, with a sulfur compound, comes down as dust.
Well, look what happened.
So some thermite would have been used.
They found a reaction in some of the beams. They noted it before they had gotten carted off, that there was sulfidation in the beams of World Trade Center 7. Now, what could cause sulfidation? It was literally the steel was turned brittle and thinned out. Like it was, it's like almost if the steel beam had cancer, and it just rotted out. That doesn't happen from a fire, so something had to do that. So I believe it was a cross between high explosives and thermite, and I think the thermite was used to take out the core columns. Because if you look at, there's pictures of the core columns from the pile, you can see they're cut on a 45-degree angle. That wasn't cut by the first responders. That's how they found them. You can see it in the rubble. There's rubble all around it, and they're sticking up, and it's just slices. And you can see there's molten slag on the side of it. So there's more than enough evidence to prove that they used thermite to cut the beams, but there had to be something else, some other explosive inside the building to bring it down the way they did.
Yes,
because they broke it down literally into not into a perfect little square of its own footprint, but pretty much into the area of their own footprint, rather than
and remember
metrically.
And there's one thing I want to add to that. Remember, never forget, fires burned at the core of the building underground until December. Okay, right away, you're not talking about any kind of electric fire or any kind of petroleum, fuel fire, airplane fuel fire. Nothing like that will burn for months. That requires a special high energy weapon.
Yeah,
and it has to be military grade.
Something with
when
a
you
high
start talking about
create that heat. There's no way that kind of heat.
And it burns for months until December, and that information comes from Gordon Duff at Veterans Today.
Well, I know that I know it burned, because I can tell you. When I was doing the shifts for the Red Cross, packing up supplies, it's one thing. The biggest thing they needed that we brought to them, where we were bringing them respirators, because the fire department in the city and stuff wasn't. Companies were donating the respirators. A lot of them weren't getting to the first responders, which is interesting. We dropped it off at the staging area where all the supplies were, but all these thousands of respirators, some of them did get to them, but a lot of them didn't get to the people they were supposed to get to. And that was probably because they were trying to cover their butts, because they had already told everybody you could breathe the air down there at ground zero. Horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. and now all these people are dying. Susan, we only got about a minute left. Tell everybody where they can go get your book, because your book is really...
My book is Extreme Prejudice, The Terrifying Story of the Patriot Act and the Cover-Ups of 9/11 in Iraq. There's more information about Lockerbie and the Patriot Act and how the war on terrorism has been a major fraud against the people. And this is a book that I think that a lot of people need to know about, whether you're concerned about 9/11 or just the Patriot Act and the manipulations of the media against the people. You got to hear this stuff. Get it on Amazon. Extreme Prejudice by Susan Lindauer.
Thank you again for coming on, Susan. As always, it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to hang out with you. And I will...
Thank you so much.
I look forward to having you on again soon. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. There you go, guys. Susan Lindauer. I'll see you guys Wednesday at 10 p.m. Hey, guys. It's Popeye from Federal Jack. I just wanted to record a quick addendum to today's show, September 18th, 2011. During the break, Susan Lindauer told me some disturbing info that she, something how she felt. And I feel it necessary and deem it important enough that I'm actually, because we didn't cover it on the show, I'm doing a quick little call addendum to the show so that you guys can hear from Susan's own mouth how she feels, and if anything happens to her, basically, it wasn't her doing it. She was, done in. Just like the D.C. Madam, she said 2 weeks before her death that if she was suicided. Well, just in case anything happens to Susan, I want it on record that she didn't kill herself, hurt herself. She has no intention. She's a happy person. So, Susan, go ahead and tell the listeners what you told me.
Because of my work against the Libyan rebels, all summer long I have been receiving threats at my house. And some strange things have happened. People have shown up and been hanging around outside my house. I live in suburbia, so it has been commented on by my neighbors. And I just want to say that I would never, under any circumstances, commit suicide. I do believe in God, and this is one area where I think that if I haven't had, throughout my indictment, I never wanted to kill myself. I just don't have that kind of personality. I'm a fighting person. I'm resilient. I am recovering my strength, and I have a lot of support from friends, and there is nothing that would ever compel me to commit suicide. However, I have received threats. And if you hear that I am dead, under no circumstances should anybody believe for 1 second that I would have done this to myself. I'm a great driver. I'm in great health. I have no heart condition, nothing. There is nothing, and I would never take my own life.
I wanted to make sure you said that out loud so that people could hear it, and I'm going to put it on, not only am I going to make it a separate video and put it up on YouTube, I'm also going to attach it to the end of today's interview.
Good.
Susan hung out, for people that don't know, Susan hung out with me today, September 18th, 2011, for 2 hours, and we discussed Libya. And the information that she's come forward with about Libya has put her in jeopardy. So I want to get it out there. So the more public we are about this, the safer you are, Susan. So when you had told me that,
I'm glad.
After I got off air, it's been nagging me for about the past 25, 30 minutes. So I wanted to call you back and do this call really quick. So thank you very much for coming on and telling the listeners. Is there anything else, if there's any accidents, car accidents, anything weird like that Susan's saying that we should keep an eye on it, because if anything happens to her, it's shady, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Popeye.
No problem, Susan. Thank you. It was actually the afternoon that they started invading Tripoli, the rebels and NATO forces. And I haven't actually been able to have her on since then, so I'd like to get her take on a few things about that as well. So, without wasting any more time, because there's so much to talk about, Susan, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be on, Popeye. I love your show.
Thank you for coming back. You're always super informative, and my listeners love when you come on, because you're one of the only voices of truth about some of this stuff. I mean, I myself knew somewhat about the Lockerbie bombing, but in talking to you, you helped me piece the true facts about what really happened together. And it's disgusting to see it used as an excuse to, for us to be involved in Libya.
Well, it's really extraordinary. I'd like to talk a lot about Libya today. Libya, when I was on, what's happening in Libya right now is not what the corporate media is telling you. I was perhaps a little bit optimistic on the last show because I had been receiving all kinds of reports from inside Libya about the strength of Gaddafi's support base. However, NATO now has flipped it is now playing the role of propaganda, pretending that its level of support is very high. In fact, what's happening right now in Libya is that in Benghazi, the Islamic radicals are fighting against the old Gaddafi guard. It will surprise some of you, and I know you have a very sophisticated audience, to know that the new Transitional National Council is actually based with three major groups: Islamic radicals, which we've all talked about, and old
Susan might have gotten cut off. That happens sometimes during our interviews. It's kind of creepy and a little unnerving, but that actually happens a lot every time she's on. As the listeners know, sometimes she gets cut off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to call her back. So just bear with me for a second. It happens sometimes. Usually when she gets to meaty stuff or a juicy tidbit is usually when it happens.
Hey there, we're off to a good start, aren't we?
I just said to the listeners, it must be some good information, because every time you start to talk about something good, they cut your phone line off. This isn't something that doesn't happen all the time, so we're used to this. So
okay.
Go on, Susan.
Okay, yeah, people. I was about to say that there are three major groups tied to the Libyan rebels, and I still think of them as rebels because they have not won the country. They are Islamic radicals, they are royalists who would like to restore the monarchy to Libya, and they are from King Idris, who was deposed, in the 40s, I guess. And there's also the old Gaddafi guard who came over to the Trana woman, got married. They got $50,000 to get started and have children and start, building a house and having a life. Free education, free health care. Gaddafi did a lot of things right.
You're about to get cut off by the break, Susan. Stay right there.
That's okay.
As always, the bumpers always come in just when you're getting to, something good or something meaty, but that's okay. We'll pick it up right there when we come back. Listeners, stay tuned. 2 full hours with Susan Lindauer. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Susan, during the break, we were discussing all the infighting that's going on amongst the Libyan rebels. I mean, there's not even unity. It's they played off with Sarkozy and Cameron flying in there the other day, and they have people in the hospital run out and, give them a hero's welcome, and the media plays it all up. Oh, look, they get a hero's welcome for, Libya and all this other crap, and now the Obama administration's jumping on the bandwagon. Yay, we did a great job. Yay, unified Libya. This is the people's revolution. They did it. Yay. There's not even any cohesive unity amongst these people. You have fighters and warlords and nomads and mercenaries. It's just crazy.
It is absolutely dishonest of them to pretend. In fact, when Sarkozy and Cameron showed up, most of the city was quiet. And it's an ominous silence because these are cities that are very vibrant. They're usually people who are out on the street doing their business. And what they did was they went in and shut their doors. And they did not look out their windows. and they're showing, they did not look out their windows. They did not rush into the streets to greet them. In fact, when Sarkozy and Cameron arrived, they arrived to people who turned their back on them and said, we will not come even, take a peek at you, and we will not allow you to see our faces. You will drive through our cities and there will be no cars. There will be no well-wishers. You will come to a ghost town. And that is because the people of Libya absolutely revile NATO. These are people who have been, when I was at the United Nations covering Libya was one of the most paranoid and closed societies in the world. It would be like arriving in North Korea. They're very sophisticated people. They are not stupid. And part of the problem for the United States and NATO is that we have
either we heal as a team, or we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's just a game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. And I know if I'm going to have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You gotta look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're gonna see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're gonna see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're gonna do the same for him. That's a team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Welcome to the show. It is Sunday, September 18th, 2011. I am live with my good friend Susan Lindauer today, and she's going to be hanging out for 2 full hours. We're going to be discussing everything from 9/11 to the Patriot Act to Iraq to anything Susan wants to cover, including Libya. Because the last time I talked to her...
Transitional Council, so that they could protect their positions and their status and their jobs as in the bureaucracy. And so what's happening right now in Benghazi, while NATO and the corporate media, CNN and all these places are telling you that, oh, NATO's doing really well, the Libyan people have accepted this change. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. In Benghazi right now, which is where the revolution was started, the Islamic radicals and the Gaddafi old guard Gaddafi bureaucrats are now fighting it out. And the United States, ironically enough, and the CIA are coming down on the side of the Gaddafi bureaucrats, because the Islamic radicals want to instate Sharia. And they are now throwing off their cloaks. They're like the Trojan horse who came into this rebellion undercover, and they're Al Qaeda and Islamic radicals, and they've brought in mercenaries from Afghanistan. And
it's important people understand that Sharia law is not instituted right now in Libya. They had under Gaddafi, he was a benevolent dictator. Okay, I'm not saying the guy was awesome, but they had under Gaddafi more freedom than they are going to have now under this NATO-backed rebel council. And these, this just goes to show that there's not one unified movement with these people. You have the people in the suits that call themselves the transitional party leaders, and then you have the psycho Al-Qaeda, warriors that are out on the field themselves, and these are the guys that are doing the beheadings. Well, them and the special forces from Qatar, right, and the Brits and us and the Dutch and a few other people.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And we have sided with a bunch of murderous thugs. And we keep saying this to people, and I think it's sinking in with your audience, but we just spread the word. These are the same identical fighters that the United States has been battling in Iraq and the Soviets battled in Chechnya and the Balkans. This is the same group of people, identical fighters. These are not a group of similar people. They are the same people, and who we have been fighting in Afghanistan. These are the Taliban. Okay, the Taliban has now moved over to Libya. Why would we have wanted to do this? This was a very stupid, short-sighted move. We've taken a peaceful, prosperous, stable country. Again, Gaddafi was a dictator. He was a benevolent dictator. He had the best track record on women's rights in the whole Middle East. He had an 89% literacy rate. He had a 5% poverty rate. Every married couple got $50,000 just to start a family. Can you imagine if our government could do that? When a man pretended for the media that they are not very bright people, they're Bedouin people, they are not sophisticated like we are, they're not urbane like we are. And in fact, that's not true. They are desert people, and they are somewhat nomadic. However, they also tend to speak 5 or 6 languages. They have a deep history that goes all the way back to the Phoenicians and Greco-Roman times. They see a history, they see their own history, they measure it in thousands of years, and they're very knowledgeable about their history, and they understand their place in the global scheme and where it fits in the Mediterranean and the power base that they occupy. And they refuse to bend to outsiders. So it would be like when I compare this all the time to Napoleon's arrival in Moscow. When Napoleon arrived, for those of you who have forgotten this story, when Napoleon arrived in Moscow, he had beaten the Russians back. He'd beaten the Russian generals back. And he showed up in Moscow, and he's like, "Oh, I am the triumphant victor. I am here. Where are the crowds to greet me? Where are the crowds to stand in awe of my presence and to come witness their humiliation?" And one of the very significant things was that the mayor and the chief families of Moscow refused to go before Napoleon and give him the keys to the city. They just simply evaporated. They left him. So here he was, occupying a grand palace in Moscow. Napoleon was occupying a grand palace in Moscow, and there were no servants, and there were no throngs of nobility afraid, bowing and bending before him. And he said, "Where are all the people?" And he looked out on Moscow, And he started to see fires. This is true. This is historically what happened. This is not make-believe. He started to see fires on the horizon around the city. And what was happening was that the great families, the Russian people, and a lot of the great families by this time had fled. To be honest, they'd left Moscow. But they burned it. They burned, the people went in and burned the great houses so that Napoleon couldn't have them. And that is what is starting to happen now in Libya. And it's a very important to understand this, because the people of Libya, NATO thinks in its fantasy, it's been 3 whole weeks, people. It's been, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks since NATO forced its way in there. And they are hoping that the people's silence means obedience. But in fact, Libya does not have that kind of personality that would ever bend to anybody